The Galactic Collective had spent approximately 14,000 years perfecting higher education. They'd built universities on moon stations, orbital platforms, and carefully terraformed academic colonies where the galaxy's brightest minds could gather to share knowledge, conduct research, and occasionally blow up laboratory equipment in ways that violated several laws of physics. The Zenith Scholastic Institute, hovering in stable orbit around a pleasantly boring yellow star, represented the pinnacle of this achievement. A floating campus where 247 species coexisted in relative harmony, pursuing degrees in everything from quantum chromodynamics to interpretive dance therapy. The key word here being relative. Because 3 years ago, the collective had made what many now considered a catastrophically optimistic decision. They'd accepted applications from Earth. Professor Klickthar stood at the front of Advanced Xenobiology Foradisca 1, his 4 eye stalks swiveling independently to monitor his 32 students. As a Velcarian, he possessed a natural talent for multitasking. Each eye stalk could focus on separate tasks simultaneously, which proved remarkably useful when teaching a classroom full of species who processed information at wildly different speeds. His exoskeleton gleamed under the bioluminescent panels, and his mandibles clicked softly as he prepared to begin the day's lecture. "Today," he announced, his translator converting his chemical signals into audible speech, "we discuss survival adaptations in hostile environments." The students settled into their species-appropriate seating. The Mathara, being gaseous, occupied containment fields near the ceiling. The Grundle twins, massive and rock-like, sat on reinforced platforms at the back. The Shalani, delicate and crystalline, clustered near the temperature-controlled section where they wouldn't risk thermal shock. And then there was Mackenzie Torres. She sat in the 3rd row, looking spectacularly ordinary by human standards. Average height, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing what appeared to be comfortable fabric coverings that humans inexplicably called sweatpants, despite their apparent use in non-sweating contexts. She was currently eating something from a small bag, crunching loudly in the quiet classroom. The Velnik student 2 seats over, a being resembling a nervous bundle of tentacles, edged slightly away. Smart creature. Deathworlds, Professor Klickthar continued, pulling up a holographic display, are classified on a scale from Class 1 to Class 12, with Class 12 representing environments so hostile that sapient life emerging from them is considered statistically impossible. He paused for dramatic effect. Earth is classified as a Class 12. Several students glanced at Mackenzie. She appeared completely absorbed in her snack. "To put this in perspective," the professor said, zooming in on a rotating model of Earth. Earth experiences regular meteorological events called hurricanes that can level entire cities. It hosts volcanic activity capable of altering global climate. 70% of its surface is covered in a corrosive solvent. Water's not that corrosive. Mackenzie interjected through a mouthful of whatever she was eating. It literally dissolves metal over time, Miss Torres. Well, yeah, but slowly. The professor's eye stalks blinked in sequence, the Velcarian equivalent of a long-suffering sigh. Earth's gravity is 1.3 times standard. Its atmosphere contains oxygen at levels that would be toxic to 60% of known species. It hosts predators that can smell blood across vast distances, venomous creatures whose toxins have no universal antidote, and microscopic organisms that can kill in days. "You're making it sound way more dramatic than it is," Mackenzie said, finally finishing her snack. "It's just home." A Shalani student, crystalline structure literally vibrating with anxiety, raised a delicate appendage. "Miss Torres, is it true that Earth has Spiders? Oh yeah, tons of them. Pretty much everywhere. The Shalani made a sound like wind chimes in an earthquake. And they're predatory arachnids with 8 legs and multiple eyes and venomous fangs? Most of them aren't dangerous to humans. Just the really big ones in Australia. And the brown recluses. Oh, and black widows. But honestly, you're statistically more likely to die from a bee sting. Bees kill humans? Several students shouted simultaneously. Only if you're allergic, or if you mess with the wrong hive. Africanized bees get pretty aggressive. Mackenzie seemed genuinely confused by their distress. Why is everyone looking at me like that? Professor Clickthar decided to move on before someone had a panic attack. The point being, he said firmly, that organisms evolving on Deathworlds develop extraordinary survival capabilities. Enhanced pattern recognition, sustained endurance, pain tolerance, accelerated healing, and most significantly, adaptability. He pulled up comparison charts showing human capabilities against galactic averages. The human's endurance metrics literally broke the scaling on several graphs. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, the professor continued. They would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Their ability to regulate body temperature through perspiration allowed them to function in conditions that would kill most species. Their immune systems treat encounters with pathogens as competitive sports. Mackenzie raised her hand. Are we still talking about survival adaptations, or are you roasting humans specifically? I'm providing context, Ms. Torres. Context that explains why the collective was hesitant to allow human enrollment in civilian institutions. Yet, here I am, Mackenzie said cheerfully. Yes, Professor Clickthar agreed, his tone suggesting he had opinions about that decision. Here you are. The lecture continued for another hour, covering everything from extremophile adaptations to the biological cost of developing sentience in hostile environments. Mackenzie participated normally, taking notes on her electronic tablet and occasionally contributing insights about Earth biology that made her classmates uncomfortable. She mentioned something about humans eating peppers that contained capsaicin, a compound literally designed to cause pain as a defense mechanism, for recreational purposes. Then she casually noted that one of her ancestors had survived a bear attack. What's a bear? Someone asked nervously. Imagine a furry predator the size of a small vehicle with claws like knives and enough bite force to crush bones. And your ancestor survived? He fought it off with a stick and a really aggressive attitude. Lost an arm, though. Well, mostly lost it. Doctors reattached it later. The classroom fell silent. Humans have medical technology to reattach limbs? A student whispered. I mean, if you get to a hospital fast enough and keep it on ice, yeah. Professor Clickthar ended the lecture early. Some revelations required processing time. The class dispersed with the usual shuffling, floating, and slithering exodus that characterized mixed-species institutions. Mackenzie gathered her materials, completely oblivious to the fact that half her classmates gave her a wider berth than usual. She'd mentioned maybe grabbing something from the commissary, but she'd promised to return a data slate to the research library first, some material she'd borrowed for a paper on comparative evolutionary biology. She headed down Corridor 7B, a section of campus that connected the main academic buildings to the research wing. At this time of day, most students were either in classes or at meals, which meant the corridor was blissfully empty. Mackenzie appreciated the quiet. As much as she enjoyed her xenobiology courses, constantly being treated like a walking biological weapon got exhausting. She didn't notice the 3 figures detaching from a maintenance alcove behind her. They moved with practiced silence, following at a distance that would seem casual to any observer. Their leader, a Krathnix named Zexivor, felt his dual hearts hammering with anticipation. This was it, the ultimate hunt, the trophy that would cement his reputation across a dozen hunting forums and establish him as a legend among those who pursued dangerous game. A human, a genuine Deathworld predator, isolated and unaware. Zexivor and his companions belonged to an underground community that the collective officially condemned but couldn't entirely eliminate. Extreme hunters who sought thrills by tracking and killing dangerous species. They'd hunted Grendax alphas in sulfur swamps, stalked Velkar queens in their hive depths, even taken down a juvenile kraken on Poseidon 7. But a human? That was unprecedented. Humans were supposedly protected under collective law, considered too dangerous to provoke and too valuable as potential military assets to risk antagonizing. But Zexivor had studied human physiology extensively. He'd analyzed their weaknesses, mapped their vulnerable points, acquired weapons specifically calibrated for human biology. And he'd confirmed that Mackenzie Torres followed a predictable routine, including this twice-weekly trip to return library materials when the corridors were mostly empty. Perfect conditions for a hunt. His companions, Thrix and Velmora, flanked him at calculated intervals. Thrix carried a neural disruptor, non-lethal, designed to incapacitate without permanent damage so they could enjoy the hunt properly. Velmora had brought recording equipment. This was going to be documented for posterity. They waited until Mackenzie entered the less populated junction between buildings, where maintenance corridors branched off and security cameras had convenient blind spots. Zexivor had planned meticulously. "Now," he whispered. Thrix raised the neural disruptor and fired. The pulse should have dropped Mackenzie instantly. A targeted electromagnetic burst that scrambled neural pathways and caused temporary paralysis. Instead, she stumbled, caught herself against the wall, and turned around looking more annoyed than incapacitated. "The hell was that?" she asked, rubbing her temple. Zexivor froze. That should have worked. He'd calculated the frequency, the intensity, everything. Humans were supposed to be vulnerable to neural disruption, their primitive nervous systems overwhelmed by... Mackenzie's eyes focused on them. Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition, to something that made Zexivor's predatory instincts scream warnings. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," she said. "You're hunters, aren't you?" Thrix fired again, cranking the disruptor to maximum intensity. This time Mackenzie grimaced and went down on one knee. But she didn't lose consciousness. Instead, she looked at them with an expression that was somehow worse than fear. She looked tired. "Seriously? I have a paper due tomorrow." Velmora activated the recording equipment, chittering excitedly. "The prey remains conscious. Documented resistance to neural disruption." "I'm not prey," Mackenzie said, her voice carrying an edge that made the temperature in the corridor seem to drop. "I'm a student. There's a difference." Zexivor stepped forward, drawing a monomolecular blade, a weapon that could slice through most organic matter at the molecular level. "You are a specimen from a Class 12 Deathworld," he announced formally, because proper hunting required proper declarations. "Your termination will bring honor to..." Mackenzie threw the data slate. It wasn't a sophisticated move. Humans, lacking natural weapons, had gotten very good at improvising with objects. The data slate, a solid piece of technology weighing approximately half a kilogram, hit Zexivor directly in his primary sensory cluster. His vision exploded into stars, pain receptors firing as the impact cracked his chitin. And then Mackenzie moved, The neural disruptor's effects were still coursing through her system, making her movements slightly uncoordinated. Later, when reviewing the security footage that Velmora had helpfully been recording, analysts would note that she was operating at approximately 60% efficiency. 60% of a human's combat capability turned out to be more than sufficient. She closed the distance to Thrix in 3 strides. Humans were cursed with persistence hunting physiology, which meant their running endurance was absurd. But their sprinting was actually below galactic average. Except at close range, where below average still meant fast enough to be terrifying. She grabbed the neural disruptor with one hand, yanked it from Thrix's grip, and slammed her elbow into his thorax in a single fluid motion. Thrix made a sound like escaping steam and crumpled. Velmora, demonstrating survival instincts that would have served her better half an hour earlier, turned and ran. She made it approximately 10 meters before Mackenzie tackled her from behind. They went down in a tangle of limbs, and Velmora discovered firsthand why human skeletal structure was so overbuilt. When they fell, they could afford to hit hard because their bones could take the impact. Velmora's crystalline structure, optimized for low-gravity environments, was significantly more fragile. The recording equipment went flying, clattering against the corridor wall but still transmitting. "Stop! Wait, we can negotiate," Velmora stammered. Mackenzie sat on her, literally just sat down on her chest plate, pinning her with human body weight in human standard gravity. "You shot me," she said conversationally. "With a neural disruptor, that's going to give me a headache for hours." "We weren't going to kill you quickly," Velmora protested, as if this was somehow better. "We wanted a proper hunt, the chase, the challenge." "I have midterms next week." Zexavor, vision clearing, watched this exchange with growing horror. This wasn't how hunts worked. The prey was supposed to run, to fight desperately, to provide sport. They weren't supposed to look annoyed about the timing. He raised his monomolecular blade and charged. Mackenzie saw him coming. Human eyes, forward-facing for predatory depth perception, tracked movement with frustrating efficiency. She rolled off Velmora, came up in a crouch, and grabbed a maintenance panel from the wall. The metal panel, designed for accessing electrical systems, was never meant to be used as a shield. But humans had a long history of using objects in ways their creators never intended. The monomolecular blade hit the panel and went straight through it, which was exactly what Mackenzie had anticipated. The blade embedded itself in the metal, and while Zexavor tried to yank it free, Mackenzie twisted the panel sharply sideways. The blade snapped. Monomolecular weapons were incredibly sharp, but also incredibly brittle. A calculated trade-off that worked fine against flesh, but poorly against lateral stress. Zexavor stared at his broken weapon with the dawning realization that he'd made catastrophic miscalculations. Mackenzie stood up, still holding the panel with half a blade sticking through it. "Okay," she said. "Let's talk about expectations versus reality." What followed wasn't a hunt. It was a systematic dismantling. Zexavor tried to use his Krathnik's natural advantages: armored carapace, venomous spurs, forearms for grappling. Mackenzie countered by hitting him with the maintenance panel repeatedly until his armor cracked. When he deployed his spurs, she avoided them with the kind of pattern recognition that came from a childhood spent dodging everything from playground bullies to household pets. Humans evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill them, which meant they got very good at identifying threats and responding before their conscious mind fully processed the danger. She hit him in the joint where his secondary arms connected to his thorax. A structural weak point that most species didn't know about because they didn't think in terms of vulnerable joints. Humans, having fragile joints themselves, were experts at exploiting them in others. Zexavor's arm made a cracking sound and went limp. "You researched human biology," Mackenzie said, breathing hard but not winded. That was another thing. Humans could sustain physical activity for absurd durations because of their inefficient but incredibly effective cooling system. But you didn't research human psychology. She hit him again, this time in the head. Not hard enough to kill. Humans were surprisingly good at calibrating force, but hard enough to stun. "You thought I'd panic, run away, act like prey." Another hit, another crack. But humans don't have a prey response. We have a fight-or-flight response, and flight is really just tactical repositioning for a better fight. Zexavor went down, consciousness fading. His last thought, transmitted to his hunting forum via emergency beacon, was a simple warning. Do not hunt humans. They cheat. Mackenzie turned her attention to Thrix, who was trying to crawl away, despite his collapsed thorax. The neural disruptor had clattered somewhere nearby. She found it, examined it briefly, and then crushed it under her shoe. "Fragile equipment," she observed. "You guys really counted on that first shot working." Thrix made gurgling sounds that the translator rendered as pleas for mercy. Mackenzie crouched next to him, expression thoughtful. "Here's the thing about humans," she said quietly. "We're not naturally aggressive. We actually prefer cooperation. It's how we survived as a species. But we evolved in an environment where everything was a threat, so we learned to eliminate threats efficiently." She picked up a piece of the shattered neural disruptor, a Fate-Mape's sharp edge of crystalline circuitry. "And once we identify something as a threat?" She paused, as if considering her next words carefully. "We're very good at solving problems." Thrix stopped gurgling. Velmora, watching from where she'd crawled to a corner, realized with absolute clarity that she was going to die. Not in some glorious hunt, not in a fair fight, but in a university corridor at the hands of someone who treated lethal combat with the same casual competence most people applied to daily chores. Mackenzie stood, dropping the circuitry shard, and walked over to her. "Please," Velmora whispered. I have spawn. 3 offspring in developmental pods." Mackenzie stopped. For a long moment, she just looked at Velmora, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite sympathy. Humans had complicated emotional responses to threats. But a calculation, a recognition. "You have kids," Mackenzie said flatly. Yes, 3 larvae, they need..." "And you thought coming after me was a good idea?" Velmora had no answer for that. Mackenzie rubbed her face with both hands, leaving slight smears of blue blood, Zexavor's, from the carapace impacts. Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly who organized this, who funded it, and how many people knew about it. Every detail. And then you're going to help me clean this up." "Clean up?" "Evidence disposal," Mackenzie said matter-of-factly. "Because if campus security finds out about this, they'll investigate. And investigations mean paperwork, and I really don't have time for that right now." Velmora stared at her. "You're going to cover it up? Look, you made stupid choices, but executing you won't bring back the time you've already wasted for me. And your kids don't deserve to lose their parent because you're an idiot." Mackenzie's voice was pragmatic, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "But we're doing this my way. Understand?" Velmora nodded frantically. "Good. Start talking." The story came out in pieces. Zexavor had organized everything through an underground hunting forum. Encrypted, distributed across multiple servers, theoretically untraceable. They'd been planning this for 3 months, studying Mackenzie's patterns, acquiring specialized equipment. The neural disruptor had cost Zexavor his savings. They'd bribed a maintenance worker to create those security camera blind spots. Mackenzie listened, committing every detail to memory. When Velmora finished, she nodded slowly. "How many others know you were hunting me specifically?" Just the forum administrators. They approved the hunt." "Names?" Velmora hesitated. "If I give you names, your options are limited here," Mackenzie said. "Help me, and you get to go home to your kids. Don't help, and—" She gestured vaguely at Thrix and Zexavor's bodies. Well, the names came quickly after that. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the collective as a textbook example of evidence disposal and counter-investigation tactics. Not officially, of course. Officially, it never happened at all. Mackenzie started with the immediate problem: 3 bodies in a corridor that would see student traffic in approximately 90 minutes when the evening classes ended. Moving them would require strength, planning, and detailed knowledge of campus infrastructure. Humans, as it turned out, were excellent at all 3. "Help me get him into that maintenance shaft," she told Velmora, gesturing at Thrix's body. "I don't have the physical strength to—" "You have appendages. Use them for leverage." Together, well, mostly Mackenzie, they maneuvered Thrix's body into a maintenance access shaft that ran behind the corridor walls. These shafts were designed for repair drones, which meant they were cramped, dark, and rarely inspected. Perfect for temporary storage. Zexavor came next. He was heavier, armored carapace, adding significant mass. But Mackenzie improvised a lever system using a pry bar from a maintenance locker and managed to shift him into a different shaft. Spreading the bodies across multiple locations, basic evidence disposal strategy. "The recording equipment," Mackenzie said, turning to where Velmora's camera had landed. It was still transmitting. She picked it up, examined the device with the casual interest of someone who'd taken Engineering 201, and carefully disconnected the transmission module without corrupting the data. Then she pocketed it. "That has our hunt on it," Velmora protested weakly. "Exactly. Insurance policy. If anyone comes after me, this goes directly to campus security, along with the names you gave me. But you attacked me on a university campus. You used illegal weapons. You were planning to kill me and record it for entertainment." Mackenzie's voice was perfectly reasonable, which made the implied threat land harder. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Don't waste it." Velmora made a sound like breaking glass, her species equivalent of a resigned sigh. The next part was more delicate: the blood. Zexavor's blue ichor had splattered across several meters of corridor, along with fragments of chitin and other biological debris. Standard cleaning protocols would flag this as a potential biohazard, triggering automatic reports to campus security. Mackenzie pulled out her personal comm and accessed the university's maintenance scheduling system. A few quick searches — she'd taken information system security last semester and remembered the access protocols — showed her that automated cleaning drones ran through this corridor section at 300 station time, 4 hours away. "We need to make this look like a normal mess," she said, more to herself than Velmora. "Something the drones would clean without reporting." She found a beverage dispensary 2 corridors over and returned with an armful of colorful drinks. Then, systematically, she spilled them across the bloodstains, creating a chaotic mess of mixed liquids that obscured the specific chemical signatures. added some food waste from a nearby disposal unit, tracked it around with her shoes to spread it out. From a distance, it looked like students had had a messy meal and failed to clean up after themselves. Irritating, but not alarming. "Your blade," Mackenzie said, pointing at Zexavor's shattered monomolecular weapon. "That goes into a recycler. Different section of campus. Break it down into components first." Velimora, operating on pure survival instinct now, helped dismantle the weapon. The handle went into a general waste recycler in the student union. The blade fragments, carefully wrapped in cloth to prevent injuries, went into a hazardous materials disposal in the science wing. The power cell got dropped into an electronics recycling bin near the engineering department. No single piece would trigger alarms. Altogether, they'd been a weapon. Separated, they were just waste. The neural disruptor had already been crushed, but Mackenzie wasn't taking chances. She disassembled it completely, scattering components across 4 different recycling centers. The power source went into a sealed disposal unit for radioactive materials. Technically incorrect disposal, but it would be processed without questions. By the time they finished, 2 hours had passed. Mackenzie was sweating, human temperature regulation in action, and Velimora looked like she might shatter from stress. "The forum," Mackenzie said. "You're going to log in and post a cancellation. Tell them Zexavor changed his mind, decided the risk wasn't worth it. Make it sound like he got cold feet. They'll want proof, then provide it. Send them a message from his account saying he's backing out. You have his access codes, right? For emergencies. This qualifies." Velimora's appendages trembled as she accessed her comm and logged into the hunting forum through Zexavor's credentials. The message she composed, under Mackenzie's watchful eye, was brief. Target proved too risky. Excessive security presence, pattern changes detected. Aborting hunt. Do not recommend pursuing human subjects. The forum administrators responded within minutes. Disappointing. Resources expended. This reflects poorly on your reputation. Zexavor's account, controlled by Velimora, replied, "Better a damaged reputation than a fatal mistake." The administrators accepted this. Hunters backed out sometimes. It happened. "Now, delete all communications about me from his systems," Mackenzie instructed. "And from yours. Every message, every file, every search query." That won't eliminate the backups, I know, but it creates ambiguity. If anyone investigates later, there's no clear paper trail leading to me specifically. Velimora worked quickly, deleting months of preparation. Mackenzie watched, occasionally pointing out missed items, a saved image, a bookmark, a cached search result. By the time they finished, Zexavor's digital footprint regarding Mackenzie Torres had been reduced to nearly nothing. "The bribed maintenance worker," Mackenzie said. "Name: Glixnor, 3rd shift supervisor. You're going to send him a message from Zexavor's account. Thank him for his help. Tell him the hunt was successful and you're leaving the station. Include a payment, whatever Zexavor promised him. Make it traceable back to Zexavor's accounts. That will implicate him in our disappearance." "Exactly. If security investigates missing persons, they'll find a maintenance supervisor who took bribes and covered for suspicious activity. That's who they'll focus on, not the missing persons themselves." Velimora hesitated, then complied. The message was sent, the payment transferred. Glixnor would receive his bribe and think the hunt had concluded successfully. And if anyone investigated later, he'd have significant explaining to do. "One more thing," Mackenzie said. "Your ship. You came here on a vessel, right? Zexavor's personal transport. Docked at Bay 17. Access codes." Velmora provided them. Mackenzie spent several minutes on her comm, accessing station systems with credentials she definitely shouldn't have had. Another gift from Information System Security class, and reprogramming the transport's flight plan. Destination: a debris field in an uninhabited system 2 jumps away. Departure time: Oro 600 station time. It'll autopilot there and power down, she explained. Anyone tracking Zexfor will think he left voluntarily, and by the time anyone finds the ship, if anyone finds it, there'll be no connection to what happened here. But Zexfor and Thrix are in maintenance shafts that won't be inspected for months. By then, biological decomposition will have progressed to the point where determining cause of death becomes difficult. And even if they're found, there's no evidence connecting them to me. Velmora stared at her. You've thought about this, about how to hide bodies. I took forensic science as an elective, Mackenzie said, and I watched a lot of crime documentaries growing up. Humans are weird about murder mysteries. We find them entertaining. She checked her comm. It's 02:30. Cleaning drones start in half an hour. We need to be gone before then. What about me? Velmora asked quietly. Mackenzie regarded her for a long moment. You're going to go back to your spawn. You're going to be a better parent than you demonstrated today. And you're never going to speak about this to anyone. Because if word gets out, if anyone comes after me, if I even suspect that you've talked... She held up the recording module. This goes public, along with every name you gave me. Understand? Yes. Good. Get out of here. Velmora fled, moving faster than Mackenzie had seen her move during the entire incident. Within seconds, she disappeared around a corner, leaving Mackenzie alone in the corridor with her improvised crime scene. Mackenzie looked around, mentally checking off her list. Bodies hidden. Check. Evidence disposed. Check. Digital trail erased. Check. Witnesses silenced. Check. Alternative narrative established. Check. She felt tired. The neural disruptor's effects were finally wearing off completely, leaving her with a splitting headache and sore muscles. Tomorrow was going to be unpleasant. Adrenaline crashes always were. But first, she needed to return that data slate to the library. She picked it up from where she'd dropped it after throwing it at Zexivore, slightly dented but functional, and continued walking as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Mackenzie showed up to Advanced Xenobiology 401, looking slightly more tired than usual. She had a small bandage on her left hand. Officially, she'd cut herself while cooking. The headache was manageable with standard painkillers, though she winced occasionally when someone spoke too loudly. Professor Klickthar noticed but said nothing. Students injured themselves regularly in various improbable ways. It was university life. The lecture proceeded normally. Today's topic: interspecies conflict resolution and communication strategies. Ironic timing. But Mackenzie participated without revealing any sign of the previous evening's activities. She took notes, asked intelligent questions about de-escalation techniques, and helped a struggling Shilani student understand predator-prey dynamics during the break. You seem tense, the Shilani observed. Are you well? Just didn't sleep great, Mackenzie said. Stress dreams. About what? Assignment deadlines mostly. Not technically a lie. She did have a paper due soon. Campus security made an announcement during lunch. 3 individuals had been reported missing by their off-station contacts: Zexivore, Thrix, and Velmora. Last known location was unclear, but station records showed Zexivore's ship had departed that morning for an unspecified destination. Personal effects had been cleared from their quarters. No signs of foul play. Students gossiped about it for approximately 20 minutes before moving on to more interesting topics, like the rumor that someone had hacked the commissary dispensers to provide free desserts. Mackenzie ate her meal. Something vaguely resembling Earth pasta, but made from ingredients that had never seen Earth, and tried not to think about the fact that she'd killed 2 people and traumatized a 3rd into becoming an accomplice. It wasn't that she lacked empathy. Humans actually had highly developed empathy, which was part of what made them successful social species. But they'd tried to hunt her. They'd shot her with a neural disruptor, planned to kill her for sport, and record it for entertainment. She'd done what needed to be done. Problem identified, problem solved. The anthropology students would have called it pragmatic survival ethics. The philosophy students would have debated proportional response and self-defense boundaries. Mackenzie just called it Tuesday. 2 weeks later, campus security concluded their investigation into the missing persons case. The official finding, Zexivore, Thrix, and Velmora had departed the station voluntarily, likely to pursue personal interests off campus. Their academic records would be marked as withdrawn. No further action required. Glixnor, the maintenance supervisor, was quietly fired for accepting bribes and falsifying work logs. He protested his innocence, but couldn't explain the payment in his account or the security footage gaps during his shifts. He left the station on a commercial transport, reputation damaged, and took a job in a mining colony where questions weren't asked. The hunting forum continued operating, but membership dropped sharply after Zexivore's abort message was circulated. Humans, the consensus agreed, were not worth the risk. Too unpredictable, too dangerous, too good at turning hunts around on hunters. Mackenzie Torres earned an A on her comparative evolutionary biology paper. She would have gotten an A, but Professor Klickthar noted that her section on human threat response was unnecessarily detailed and somewhat unsettling. She graduated 2 years later with honors, accepted a position with the collective's diplomatic corps, and went on to a distinguished career facilitating communication between species. She was particularly effective at conflict resolution, colleagues noted. She had an almost uncanny ability to de-escalate situations before they turned violent. And sometimes, when dealing with particularly aggressive negotiators, her counterparts would back down for reasons they couldn't quite articulate. Something about her eyes, they'd say later. Something that suggested she'd seen violence up close and found it tedious rather than frightening. The hunting forum eventually shut down after a series of raids by collective security. Most members disappeared into the general population, their hunting days behind them. A few persistent ones continued pursuing dangerous game on unregulated stations. Velmora was not among them. She returned to her spawn, raised them to adulthood, and never spoke about what happened in that corridor. Late at night sometimes, when her offspring asked about interesting experiences from her youth, she'd change the subject. Some stories weren't meant for sharing. And in a maintenance shaft in the research wing of Zenith Scholastic Institute, where repair drones rarely ventured and organic matter decomposed slowly in the controlled atmosphere, 2 bodies remained undiscovered for 7 years. When they were finally found during a major infrastructure renovation, the investigation concluded they'd likely died from structural collapse or equipment malfunction, tragic accidents in a facility with thousands of kilometers of maintenance tunnels. No one connected them to a human student who'd graduated years earlier, because humans, as the galaxy was slowly learning, weren't just dangerous in combat. They were dangerous in all the quiet ways that mattered. The planning, the patience, the ability to look at a problem and dismantle it piece by piece until nothing remained but plausible deniability and carefully constructed alternative narratives. The collective had spent 14,000 years perfecting higher education, building institutions where species could gather safely to learn and grow. And for 13,997 of those years, it had worked exactly as designed. Then they'd accepted applications from Earth and discovered that humans excelled at education in ways that transcended classroom learning. They were natural problem solvers, you see. Give them a challenge, any challenge, and they'd find a solution. Sometimes the solution was elegant. Sometimes it was crude. Sometimes it was wrapped in carefully disposed evidence and sealed behind layers of digital obfuscation. But it was always effective. Professor Klickthar, reflecting on his career years later, would note in his personal logs that teaching humans had fundamentally changed his understanding of Deathworld psychology. They weren't mindless predators or violence-driven primitives. They were thoughtful, social, empathetic beings who happened to come from an environment that demanded ruthless efficiency when actual threats emerged. The key word being actual. Provoke them unnecessarily, and they'd respond with overwhelming pragmatism. Leave them alone, and they'd cheerfully coexist with anyone. The galaxy, slowly adapting to human presence, developed an unofficial policy. Don't fuck with humans. Not because they'll make dramatic displays of violence, but because they'll solve the problem you represent with the same casual competence they apply to everything else. And you'll never see it coming. Mackenzie Torres, sipping coffee during a diplomatic break years later, would have found that assessment amusing. She didn't think of herself as particularly dangerous. She was just someone who'd had midterms coming up and really didn't have time for amateur hunters with overconfident plans. Problem identified. Problem solved. End of story. Well, almost the end. Because in an encrypted data vault, backed up across multiple secure servers, was a recording of a hunt gone catastrophically wrong. Insurance, Mackenzie had called it. A guarantee that certain names, certain forum administrators, certain individuals who thought hunting humans was acceptable entertainment, would never feel safe acting on those impulses again. She checked on it sometimes, made sure the encryption was current, the storage was secure, the dead man's switch, set to release the footage if she failed to input a code monthly, was functioning properly, just in case. Humans, after all, believed in insurance policies, in contingency plans, in making sure problems, once solved, stayed solved. It was that kind of thorough thinking that had brought them from class 12 Deathworld primitives to respected members of the Galactic Collective. And it was that same thinking that made the smart species very, very careful about treating them as prey. The hunters had come after class. The Deathworld girl had struck back, killed them all, and erased the proof. Well, most of the proof. The rest was filed under motivation to never try that again. And in the grand scheme of galactic education, that might have been the most valuable lesson of all. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.